Debt can crush a person, it can also crush a household, and it will certainly crush a government. And this is what is happening right now all around the world. It is particularly evident in the US with massive amounts of debt, with unfunded liabilities in the trillions upon trillions of dollars that can simply never be paid back. But even if we go with the on-balance sheet statistics, we see that it is an impossible feat to imagine. Let's get into the 4 ways the government can get out of debt. And I assure you, this is not going to look pretty. This right here is a very interesting chart to look at, and this basically shows all the Federal Reserves, their different sayings and how the public hangs on to every single word that they have said. I've mentioned this many times before, showed you their quotes, but now let's go into a chart that actually compares their quotes to what happens in the stock market. I'll just briefly read through them. The first one, Bullard, we should be willing to remove some accommodation. Right there he's saying we're going to stop printing some money, and at that point it begins to decline right away, and it goes down significantly until Williams said more QE may be needed, and we even at that point get a little bit of a drop. Yellen comes in and says confident in expansion amid foreign fears, and it stays about around the same there. This is Bullard saying a logical response is to delay the end of QE, and a nice rise right there, and it goes on and on. What we're seeing is that the Federal Reserve is the most important factor for the rise of the stock market. It doesn't matter about PE ratios. It doesn't matter about the actual health of the economy. What matters is how much money that the Federal Reserve is willing to print. The same goes for in Europe. Actually, the Federal Reserve is more important than the ECB. If you want to know, you're not in the US and you want to know what the most important factor is to determine what's going to happen in your country, the most important thing is what the Federal Reserve is going to do. It's a joke. We have our own central banks in our own countries, yet the Federal Reserve is seen as almost a central bank for these central banks because they have bailed out so many of the financial institutions all around the world, and they shouldn't be doing this. But they found out this information just after the financial crisis that this was going on, and of course this is a criminal act as far as I'm concerned. So let's go into that right now. Out of peak prosperity, saying that there have been periods where they went with very high levels of government debt, and these are the 4 traditional ways that they've been dealing with it. Number 1 is austerity. You heard of austerity during what happened in Europe, and it's still going on today. They basically put a stranglehold around the economy, around the average citizen, and that is basically supposed to have them grow. Now, austerity is good when the government is spending too much money on, let's say, bombing countries they have no business being in. You should impose the austerity on them, not the individual citizen, not closing off the so-called tax loopholes for the middle class. This is not the way you do this. It is not working. If they think that austerity is a successful thing, look at what's happening in Europe. They impose the austerity measures, and of course, more unemployment and more poverty has resulted. And then we go on to the next one, defaulting on the government debts. You can see what happened in Argentina recently, where they're defaulting on their government debt. Now, why they're doing so is a different, much different story, but we've seen other governments around the world historically had to default on their debt, and they can certainly do this. However, I don't think that they will default in the traditional sense. They will not really have to admit their fault. They will rather print currency, and that brings into the third option, rapidly destroying the value of the currency. And when they can do this through an inflationary measures, they can just print and print and print, and they run that printing press up until the point where the dollars are completely worthless, and they'll shut them off. This has been going on all around the world. We saw it in Zimbabwe, we saw it in Yugoslavia, we saw this going on in countless countries, and in many countries right now it's going on to the point where they're heading in that direction where you have inflation rates of 50%, the currency will probably the most likely scenario if it gets to 50% inflation is that the currency will be destroyed if nothing else changes. And we go into the last one, which I have to scroll down for, financial repression, what they call negative real interest rates. If they can keep the inflation rates higher and the interest payments you're taking in, savers are losing purchasing power every year. And this is a huge problem because individuals, obviously, they would want to save their money. They want to make their currency in their 9-to-5 jobs. They want to take it. They want to put it in the bank. Perhaps they want to put it in a mutual fund or a stock. But you can't do that because of the fact that money is losing value every single day. So they're chasing the more risky investments. And of course, in a financial crisis, it wipes out the average person, but the big guns like Warren Buffett are able to sustain that, or they are able to sell beforehand, and they generally, like George Soros does often, they know before the market's crashing, they pull out their money and they buy the next asset. They're always far ahead of the individual, and this is something that we've been seeing historically. Let's move on quickly, running out of time here. This chart here showing the S&P 500, that's the red line, and how essentially the federal funds rate and the other interest rates are basically declining at the same amount. You can see how they basically try and chase them downward, try to get the S&P to continue to rise up, but it doesn't work. They increase the interest rates far too slowly. You can see this historically. I've gone into this myself, looking at hundreds of years back, and they always do the same thing, how they increase the interest rates far too slowly, allowing this to boom, allowing a bubble to appear, and then they bring them down after it's far too late. This is something that happens over and over and over again. If you haven't looked into this for yourself, I suggest doing so already. See it historically going back very far. Now, this is an issue that I have, and a lot of the mainstream media does not talk about this. And basically what I wanted to say is that this is just one article, but I'll reference with others. Real-time payment system crash delays the house purchases, and basically this is the Bank of England's governor. But what I wanted to say is that this is happening all over the world, where stock trading platforms and all sorts of other different platforms, electronic platforms, are failing, and this is actually halting millions of dollars worth of trades that are supposed to be taking place but cannot because of the system itself. Now, this is very frightening because if individuals have their money, they want to get it out. What if this delay wasn't just for a minute or a second, as happens occasionally? What if it's for 3 days? What if it's for 5 days or a month or a year? What would happen to the economy? What would happen to the individual if they can't get their money out of the bank because they have all their money in the banking system? They figure, I'll just use my bank card whenever I need it. Or other things that could happen. Look at the bail-in strategies that they've been talking about that I will get into more. I have much more information on that, by the way, more to come. But essentially, this seems a lot like capital control, something I talked about in my book. This is what I wrote about. In 1971, President Nixon started imposing wage and price controls. This is similar to what was done during the Great Depression, where wages of individuals were maintained regardless of the fact that they were not justified. As previously stated, this causes distortions in the economy. You cannot set the price of anything. The free market should determine the price. That's what the Federal Reserve is doing by pumping up the stock market. They are creating a fraudulent market. They are not allowing it to come down. It is okay for the stock market to come down because the good money will fly in and it will pump the stock market back up. You do not need to print money in order to do this. This is actually really distorting the economy. As if you look at 1920, they did not intervene, and the stock market came up after a depression in just over 1 year. That is very successful, and all because they did not intervene. But price controls our wage controls are all what happens when the government intervenes in the system and makes things worse. They could do the same thing with the banking system, and they have done this in other countries, in other places around the world. They've done bank holidays in the US itself. This is what you have to worry about. Let's get into this. This is real. This is what happened out of the Voice of Russia, but I'm quoting here from something that actually happened. JP Morgan Chase basically gave out these letters to a bunch of their clients saying that they're going to have a little issue with their account. So I'll read the highlighted portion. Chase Bank has moved to limit cash withdrawals while banning business customers from sending international wire transfers, causing speculation that the bank is preparing for looming financial crisis in the United States by imposing capital controls. Number one, individuals will say that this can never happen, this is not happening, and of course they will do damage control, and Chase Bank will come out and say that this never happened, this is just a limited instance, so on and so forth. But number one, they have done this before in the past. They have imposed wage controls. They have imposed price controls in the US. This has been done before. They have called a bank holiday before. They have nationalized, or some say confiscated, the gold. They can do these things. They've done them before. We have the history. We have the track record. Why do we need to expect that this will not happen before? And of course, this is what they do every time. Now I have to move on right here. This is another one saying out of Chase again, we will no longer allow wire transfers from business savings accounts. They are suggesting, again, they're suggesting that they are not going to allow this to happen after, this specific date. Regardless, even if they do this or they do not, they're setting the precedence by doing this, and they also are basically allowing this to happen the next time. When there's another financial crisis, they can then impose these things, and this becomes a big problem for individuals because they have to then take their money out of the banking system, but if it's locked down, they're not going to be able to get at it, and that is very, very dangerous for civil unrest, for riots. This is yet another letter here out of Chase again saying you will no longer be able to send international wire transfers, and then they limit the cash activity for these accounts to $50,000 per statement cycle. And this is how they start. They start at the very high amount, and then they will go down, and pretty soon you're not allowed to get your money out. They did it in Cyprus just recently where they called a bank holiday, and then after the bank opened, while the currency was being devalued rapidly, they only allowed people to get a portion of their money out. This is very frightening, should be frightening to everybody. And essentially what I wanted to get to is that you need to have your money, your wealth, I should say, in a place that is very stable, that has a sound footing, that has not had the track record where they lock you out of it. This is a huge problem that is not being talked about in the mainstream media and will not be talked about. So we need to discuss it here. We need to have that open forum and really discuss where is the safest place to put my wealth so that I can have it, so that I can really send it on from generation to generation. I would just mention briefly, because I always get asked these questions, where do I put my money? What I suggest that what I would do, let's say, in this situation is to have your money in real assets. That's the most important thing. And very simply, you can have it in gold and silver and what they call common or junk silver. You can have it in real estate. You can have it in other types of property. Why not? Why think so big of if you can't afford a house? Why not a parking spot? Why not a storage locker? And you need to invest in other things, what I determine as the money GPS strategy, something that I bring up very often. I talked about on the Insiders. If you're not on there already, please get on there. There are now over 1,000 people on the Insiders, by the way. Just wanted to throw that in. And essentially what you need to do is get into a mode where you don't think of either stocks or bonds or paper assets or real estate. Get into a mode where you actually remove yourself from the financial system altogether. So very simply, you can have solar panels. Why pay electricity prices when you could take the money that was in your retirement account, you could put it into your solar panels, never paying electricity ever again. You can grow a garden and have that to basically grow that garden and have it, you basically reduce the cost you would pay on food. You can grow sprouts in your own house for cheap if you're living in an apartment building, for example. There are many strategies here that you can use to lessen your dependence on the financial system, on the economic system that we know is doomed. If you found this video informative, please give me a thumbs up. It is very important to me. It helps me out a lot and signals to the other YouTubers out there that this is a great video. And don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and now we have over 1,000 people on there. Thank you to all the new subscribers. I want to say hello to you. Please don't be afraid to email me. I get emails every single day, and I wish that more people would continue on with that. If you want to be on there, scroll down, go to themoneygps.com, scroll down to the bottom, fill in your email address, and you will get occasional emails from me with good, short, concise info.